Hello, and welcome to our webinar, Self-Care During COVID-19. I am Trina Kuntz. I am with the Personnel Cabinet's Kentucky Employee Assistance Program. Thank you for joining us. I am just going to tell you, I went back and forth about whether or not to do a webinar on this. We have adapted our previously scheduled topics to reflect the times, but to put together something exclusively on this, I have to be honest, I too am tired of hearing psychiatrists on the morning talk show say, connect with others. Some of the tips seem so simplistic, we discount them as unhelpful. And yet, there is no magic one thing. We keep looking for it though. Truly, the big thing is we have to be intentional in our self-care planning. That's the deal. We have to plan it, and then we have to do it. We have a natural human tendency to wait for things to come to us, and then we deal. That's not working well with what's going on in the world today. So I hope there's value in having this conversation, even though much of this has been talked about a lot already. I also hope it serves to motivate us to put what we've heard and learned into actual action. I think for many, the hardest part is it is so scary to feel out of control. That's why there's such a struggle with what's going on in this pandemic. Much of what is happening is outside of our control. It's unknown, and we don't like that. We have this natural inclination to avoid bad stuff. What we want to do, what we need to do is increase our window of tolerance. Now, our bodies are built to handle occasional stress. It's biological. We have everything we need in us for this. Think about early man. We see a man-eating dinosaur. Our brain registers that threat. We either go into fight or flight or freeze. Then we return to normal. With what's going on today, it's almost like we're living in this constant state of threat, or we're constantly scanning for potential threats. So we need to be able to increase our window of tolerance. Now, our window of tolerance is this state where we function well. We remain calm and composed even in the face of stress. It's this optimal arousal state in which our emotions can be experienced as tolerable. We don't have to try to get rid of them. They're natural. And then our experience can be integrated rather than running from all this. When we're outside of our window of tolerance, our nervous system responds by going into that survival mode, that fight, flight, or freeze. We either feel overwhelmed and go into what is known as hyperarousal, or we shut down and withdraw and go into what is known as hypoarousal. So when this window of tolerance is narrow, we may more easily fall into rigidity and depression or chaos. It's where we're reactive. But when that window of tolerance is wide, we are able to better manage stressors and have more tolerance for stress. So working on growing this window of tolerance means we're better prepared even when bad things are happening, things that are outside of our control. So we want to develop a plan for more balance, for growing this tolerance. We are not trying to be perfect, just better. So balance and growing that window of tolerance starts with giving yourself permission that your self-care has to be a priority. Now, how we're reared often impacts whether we're okay with allowing that or if we've been taught that it's selfish. Self-care is not selfishness. It is a must. It's a priority. There is a reason why they tell you to put the oxygen mask on yourself first if the cabin pressure changes in an airplane. We can't look out for anyone else if we're incapacitated. So this starts with agreeing that your self-care is important, that it's necessary. And once you give yourself that permission, then we have to plan for it and be intentional about it rather than waiting for it to just come to us. Now we're going to cover lots of ideas. So we'll have this menu for you to create your COVID-19 self-care plan later on today. And it starts with the basics, which we're going to cover first, and then save the big stuff, the dealing with the unknown, for later on. All right, when we feel out of control, fear takes over, and we have a hard time stopping that snowball of fear. It's a lot of work to try to master your thoughts. It can be worthwhile, but it's the harder stuff. We make it easier for ourselves if we try doing some things first before tackling that harder cerebral stuff. So a way of getting our arms around fear and chaos is to start with some simple planning. We accept the feelings, but then we try to just look at some simple planning. Now, we don't want to overplan and become rigid and maybe even stressfully bored with routine, but planning in big chunks helps us gain a little control. It cuts chaos and even highlights how much you are getting accomplished, so you can look at it and take a moment to celebrate what you've done. So a daily planner like this can help with some larger goal planning. Now, it's in big chunks, so you still have flexibility of rolling with whatever comes in. The boxes all around are for plugging in the time chunks in the middle and that center there. This is a good tool to use with older kids too. So you're collaborating, but allowing them to work on what they need to work on without you being the direct minute by minute nag, so to speak. You can have an adaptive version of this for little ones even, and maybe even a menu of choices for the day. Now, when my daughter was little, she and I created a binder called Mommy and Reagan's Book of Fun. We ran off and cut and pasted different activities by category, like outside activities, activities for when it's raining, quiet activities, etc. If you do this, this can be a really good activity on its own. And then when you need to give them something to shoot for later, i.e., if you do this, or if I'm able to finish this, then you can pick an activity. That can be really helpful, and that's kind of how we used it. And shopping for the activity and getting the materials together may also buy you some time while you need to get some things done as well. But having a daily planner for yourself like this, it also helps build in self-care, which left alone you probably wouldn't do if you're just waiting for it to come to you. So again, we are going to highlight some things that can build your menu of self-care techniques to plan for. And again, this is in your handout. All right, so in kind of creating that menu, we've got to start with the basics. The things we get tired of hearing but truly matter. Taking care of your physical needs. That's the baseline foundation of self-care. We cannot run on an empty tank for very long. Making your physical needs the foundation of your well-being means you are not working against yourself. If you are not getting adequate sleep and adequate nutrition, how can you expect your body to do the higher level stuff? This means being intentional about your sleep. Going to bed at the same time every night and getting up at the same time every morning is where you start. I know you're thinking, how do you live like that? But that's the basic element of good sleep hygiene. Now, we have a webinar, it's called Sleep Matters, that you may want to attend if this is an area where you may need some extra attention. But our body also needs basic nutritional fuel to function optimally. And in times of stress, we often revert to what's easy or comforting, not necessarily what's good fuel. So again, recognizing this matters and then being intentional in your nutritional choices is key. All right, certainly the weather has a huge impact on our kind of minute-to-minute moods, and luckily today, when we're presenting this, it's a nice sunny day. But there's a lot of value in getting outside in nature. Now, still while avoiding crowds, of course, but getting out into nature, even when the weather's not so great, making time for this, being intentional in that, it can give us some of those just natural, biochemical mood boosts. All right. I think a part of our kind of menu that we need to build into is this notion of uh, really being intentional in training ourselves to stay present-minded focused. It can begin with practicing deep breathing. And you may be thinking, I already know about breathing. We don't have to have a slide on this. But many of us don't use breathing in a way that helps us be calmer, more relaxed, and more focused. Often we breathe in a way that actually makes our stress worse, this kind of shallow chest breathing. That signals to the brain, gee, I'm hyper aroused. I really need to kick it into gear mode. And so if we want to signal to our brains to bring the body down, to not pour out those stress hormones, we need to use deep breathing. That means deep belly breathing, not at the upper parts of our lungs, but low in our diaphragm. So breathing in through our nose very slowly, holding it, and then breathing out, pushing that air out through our mouth. And it's even better when we do longer on the outtake than the intake. So in through the nose, hold it, and then push that air out very slowly. That's a signal to the brain to put the brakes on the stress hormones and come back down to calm. If we get better at practicing that, it makes it so much easier to use all the other kind of tools in our tool belt. But another part of being present and being mindful is a regular daily mindfulness practice. So that involves meditation, or mindfulness is a technique in meditation is a technique in practicing mindfulness. And practicing mindfulness makes us better at attending to the present rather than stuck in the shoulda, coulda, wouldas of the past. It's so easy to do that, or all of the scary potential what ifs of the future. We get a lot of life going by us by not attending to the present. A regular mindfulness practice helps us train our attention to the present. I promise I do not get kickbacks for mentioning our other workshops, but my colleague, Zach Culver, he offers a really good webinar on the practice of mindfulness if this is an area that you would like to grow in, and I highly recommend it. So acts of kindness. This is something we can add to our menu here, folks. Studies show that we develop a deeper sense of happiness and higher resilience when we do for others. When the world is out of control, intentionally exercising acts of kindness helps us so much. So it just starts for looking for ways where we can offer these specific acts of kindness. So this might be an area that you can build into your daily wellness plan or your family's plan. Now, there are numerous studies that demonstrate that gratitude is what we could call an antidote for depression. Most of the studies kind of look like this. They have a group of people who have been identified as depressed, and they typically break them up into three groups. One is a control group with no intervention. The other group is a group that receives antidepressant medication, and the other group will intentionally exercise, that is, write down at least 3, 4, or 5 things that they're grateful for daily. And at the end of these studies, what they're finding is that those who intentionally practice gratitude have a similar alleviation of depression symptoms to those who take an antidepressant. Pretty powerful stuff. Now, I'm not sure why, but the studies, they're replicated and done at, different places, different venues with different populations, but still what they find is kind of the magic number is at least 3 things. So we want to write down or name at least 3 things we're grateful for to get these benefits. Can be very powerful, very important. When we are really stressed, we have a tendency to look around and say, why isn't anyone checking on me? So we have to be a little more active in getting what we need. I am not great at asking for help. I always say I'd rather carry a refrigerator on my back than ask for help. But I recognize we can't do this alone. So we need to be active in staying connected and reaching out when we do need more support. And so there are a lot of things that are out there that you can use as little or as much as you want in terms of using technology for connectedness. So I saw, someone doing intro taekwondo classes, or there are virtual support groups. So a variety of things that are either intense involvement, or you can kind of sit back and take it a little bit at a time. I've seen local libraries offering different virtual classes and that sort of thing. So this may be a way to increase your connectivity. I found this, and I thought it was a really great example of a kind of a monthly calendar that can build in lots of different ideas for meaningful self-care. So again, you could kind of create this for yourself, or you could maybe create this for your family. All right, let's kind of move on to the work world and kind of trying to create this sense of self-care in our work lives. For those of us who are working from home, there are some kind of basic things we can do to make this work a little better for us. And it starts with setting up, kind of a designated office space and organizing that. I'm a nester. I have my office, back in my regular office. I have it kind of as my nest. Everything I need set up the way I need it. And so that transition was kind of a challenge. So setting up the office space, organizing that, getting comfortable with that designated space, setting up and learning useful technologies. We all have different levels of comfort for this, but I think the key is to not be afraid, to ask for help, find the different ways that technology can really help us do what we need to do in a different way. And then for as much as we can, we need to try to set boundaries. So if you have a full house, for as much as you can, trying to set particular office hours. Sometimes that's hard to do when you have little ones there, but just kind of making sure you're creating that set designated workspace. We all benefit from structure and routine, and so if all of the days are starting to blur together, and at first it seems so great to wear your pajamas and not have to comb your hair for an extended amount of time, that can wear. So something as simple as getting up and taking a shower, getting dressed, keeping your work day as similar to your traditional work day as possible can really help to create that sense of normalcy. So continuing with those daily routines, organizing your day, using that planner that we showed earlier that's in your handout, taking your breaks. I have found that working from home, I have been glued to my chair way more than I would have been when I was with my coworkers, and walking around and that sort of thing, going to the copy machine. So, and I've been less likely to take my kind of wellness breaks. I had a pretty good routine of what I did for some integrated and built-in exercise. I haven't been as good at that from home. So again, I have to be more intentional. When I have it on my plan that I can check off, I'm a lot more likely to do that. Just because you can have the TV on, and the news, doesn't mean you should. So eliminating distractions, making sure again that you're creating your workspace as similarly to your traditional workspace as possible can be very helpful. And with that, bookending your day. You don't want some people do very well with integrating their work and home life and just letting it be fluid. Most of us benefit from kind of bookending the day, having a starting point and an ending point. Communication is challenging now when we're a lot more spread out, but we still want to make those efforts to stay in touch. We need to try to communicate more rather than less, just because we're not face to face with folks. So again, this is learning all of those virtual tools. I can remember the first time we used the the video teams process and how excited we were to see one another, giddy almost. So, using those virtual tools that are available, using the Skype for Business or Microsoft Teams that can let your coworkers know or your management know when you're available. Those sorts of things can really help with increasing and making sure we're staying in a good place with communication. So with work connection, we don't want to wait for connectedness to come to us. We need to understand the impact of less connection. Even if you're an introvert and somebody who works well alone, we still need that contact. So what it means now is we kind of have to schedule for it. So maybe you want to schedule Zoom lunch breaks even, but we need to be thoughtful about it and intentional, and again, plan. And then to really deepen connections, we need to work at actively listening, trying to hear to understand. Sometimes that's harder to do when you're doing that remotely or via technology. So again, we want to be intentional with that. And the other thing, we're just excited to communicate with someone. Sometimes we're talking over one another. So we want to really try to deepen those connections by actively listening. Now, if you're someone who is still going to your regular workstation, everyone has different perspectives about this. Some people are glad they are, others are, maybe even a little more fearful. So if you are continuing to go to your regular workstation, these are the things we can do. We want to continue to use good hygiene and do the work that you can. Some folks are working, they're an essential worker and their supervisor isn't there. So, and we're having to do things differently. So this is, a good phrase: when in doubt, do what you can. Set boundaries around when and how you consume media. This is true for all of us, but particularly if you're still in your regular workstation. And then decide your outlook for today. No one does that but us. If we want to hyper focus on all of the bad news or all of the discouraging news, or the fact that things are done differently and it's not supposed to be this way. Instead, we want to make a decision of what our outlook is going to be like. We're going to do the best we can for where we're at. So a big part of trying to be healthy at work, as we're all transitioning to maybe even a hybrid, some working from home and some days inside, doing a rotating schedule, doing things differently, we really want to follow the guidelines. Again, use the good hygiene. These are the things we can do. Making sure we're using that social distance, because that's something we can do. Wearing our face coverings, trying to be flexible, giving grace, knowing that everyone is having to learn how to do things differently, and change is tough. And again, doing what you can. Do what you can with what you have where you are. And doing all of these things can help to gain a sense of control, knowing you're doing your best to protect yourself. You can't control for everything, but you are doing your best. If you still find you're stuck in the what ifs, and we do need to think about the potentials, create that plan. That's what we want to do. Create a preparedness plan. Do it. Come up with a plan. Know you have the plan prepared should you need it, rather than carrying that cloud of fear. I think that's key. So we won't spend a ton of time here because some of you have children and some don't, and we all have different ages. I do know it is particularly stressful for parents with kids outside of the normal activities that break up the time at home and all of the roles you're having to play. Last week, an employee called with 3 older children at home. They were still doing school at home. So she was working from home, trying to make sure they're getting done all the things they need to get done. She was feeling like life was chaotic, and all of the social media is telling her she's supposed to be baking with them and creating beautiful memories, and she just wants them to do their homework. Sometimes we're really good at stepping in and handling a crisis. Often it's the little day-to-day things that bring us to our knees, To help manage parenting worries, ask yourself, is this a real tiger or a paper tiger? Um, or ask yourself this, how will I feel about this tomorrow, next week, or next year? Remember, kids are resilient, but here are some things to shoot for to help us do the best we can. For as much as we can, try to manage our worries. Again, is this a real tiger or a paper tiger? Sometimes our worries are just, in the moment. We can step back and ask ourselves these questions. It helps us get some perspective. Keep to the routines. Make sure you're doing daily activities and exercise. It's really important to limit the family news consumption. Our kids need to pick up things that are age appropriate, and so when we have things on, we think that they're not picking up on that, and they can be. So helping them stay connected virtually, so with grandparents and virtual play dates, that sort of thing. The big thing is making plans. And again, maybe creating a pleasant events calendar with your family to kind of choose from when things feel like they're kind of chaotic. So again, here are some tips for supporting kids during this time. For as much as we can, giving ourselves some grace, but trying to act positive. Talk about what's happening, but keep it simple. Checking in with them, seeing how they're doing with all the changes. But really, it's okay to choose the path of least resistance in difficult times. And the big thing is, it is okay to ask for and accept help. Again, we can't be in this alone. We often need help, and so it might be even scheduling that FaceTime or virtual session with grandparents so you can get some breathing time. But recognizing it's okay to not always be on, to not always be, whatever this ideal of parenting is. Now, in the handout that we provided for today, there's some really good resources. So if you want to take a look at PBS, they have some really good things for how to talk to younger children, and then some really good activities for being at home with them more. And then there's a website called The Greater Good out of Berkeley that's on your handout. It has some really good info for younger kids as well, and then some resources for how to help teens. So for couples and partners during this increased time at home, we need to acknowledge the shift. It's important to not treat our partners like our coworkers, and we may need some kind of personal timeouts for when we've had it up to here and we are not in good emotional control. It's okay to say, you know what, I need a little timeout. I need to back out. We'll come back and communicate about this later. When we're in that fight or flight is not a good time to try to tackle the tough things. We need to get our bodies and our minds under control, do the deep breathing, get a good perspective, and then come back to it later. But when we are communicating, we want to speak from our perspective. We're going to be less threatening, less blaming when we say, I feel, I need. And the big thing is just making an agreement, making a decision to offer grace. No one is at their best right now. And if we kind of choose that, it may help us in some of those tense moments. Okay, so I'm going to tell on myself and my spouse here. During the height of the quarantine, one of my quarantine chores was to deep clean the kitchen cabinets. I'm talking vinegar and toothbrush here. So after hours of work, later in the day, I hear my husband laughing at himself. He had spilled a whole bottle of olive oil and somehow up, not just down the cabinets, but up and down the cabinets. So my brain immediately registers that I have a man-eating dinosaur threatening me, so I have to fight, right? Well, my husband has you all to thank, because I had just worked on the slide about asking yourself the question, is this something that I'm going to be upset about tomorrow, next week, next year? I'm pretty sure I could have answered the question, yeah, I'm going to be upset tomorrow. But it was that, is this a real tiger or paper tiger? How big of a deal is this kind of question, to get the perspective on that? So we have to recognize that everyone's coping is being stretched, and we need to plan ahead that we are choosing to offer a little more grace. Now, the idea of how do we plan for dealing with the unknown? Well, that's a tough one. It is hard to let go of worry when there is uncertainty. This workbook I've listed is one of the best resources I found, and it's free. I just love it. I've referenced it in your handout, and it is a clickable link to a PDF, but I ran off my own copy of it. I liked it that much. I will let you check it out on your own time, but I wanted to cover some things that aren't in it and hit the big areas of dealing with uncertainty. Trying to tell yourself to stop feeling a certain way is like trying to stop a moving train. Instead, if we can learn to accept our feelings, but not be ran over by them, we're better off. So here's a technique that can help. It's called RAIN, it's an acronym. It's on your handout for future reference. It's just a tool to help us which means recognize. When we're having an emotion, putting a label on it, saying, wow, gosh, I'm aggravated, or hey, I'm sad, or I'm feeling anxious, can help. Even just putting the label on can have the impact of calming and giving us a little bit of space and a little bit of perspective. A is the reminder to allow the emotion to be there. We don't want to spend our energy trying to fight the emotion. So, from this perspective of mindfulness, it's okay to have an emotion. That's a natural human thing. It's what's happening in the moment. It's our human experience. But what we do with that emotion is another story. Not acting out of it in an unhealthy way is what's key. So with this kind of acronym and this stopping and intentionally thinking about it, A means just allowing the emotion, but I means to step back and kind of look at it from an investigative perspective, not ruminating on the source of it, but just saying, hey, what's going on here? All right, I've got some tightness in my chest. My face is hot. I'm feeling pretty emotional here. What am I thinking that is allowing this emotion to rise and to for me to continue to be in it? And then N is for non-identification. And actually, there's an updated version of it that has N standing for nurture. But the idea of if you go through these steps, you're going to kind of step back and not equal yourself to the emotion. It means you're not taking the emotion personally. We get caught up in the emotions and then we roll around them. But if we recognize them, allow, and then investigate, we're no longer, stuck in that identification. We can move from my emotion to this is just passing through us. I can get some distance from it, a little bit of space. So again, it's not necessary to memorize this, but the acronym is helpful to give us a tool to not just be stuck in our feelings and reaction, but rather to be intentional rather than reactive. Okay, this slide, I think this is where it's at. Realizing we all have this soundtrack of our lives playing in our minds, and it tends to be automatic. We can attend to it and look at whether or not our thoughts are healthy. So if we're able to do this, again, we're not just stuck. That underlying soundtrack that plays up throughout our day, we're not even attending to, is what drives our moods and how we respond. So we can have an impact on our outlook, on our perspective by stepping back and looking at it. Okay, if you think about it, you have 10 people going through the exact same scenario, and they all have different reactions and responses. Well, this is why. For those who are more intentional in their perspective, they have better responses to situations, even that are outside of their control. So, looking at, are my thoughts about this situation healthy or unhealthy? If you're thinking, I can never do enough, I can't handle this, think about what it would mean to say, wait a minute, how can I take this situation and get the best outcome? Or am I operating in a way that is consistent with my values? Because that gives you room for the feeling, but then helps you look at what your reaction is going to be, what your behavior is going to be. I've said this many times. I feel like we should have this as our screensaver. How can I take this situation and get the best outcome? It doesn't set us up for unreasonable expectations. It gives us room to try our best, but it doesn't mean we have to be all-knowing and superhuman. So I think this process of stepping back and looking at our thoughts and whether or not they're healthy or unhealthy is huge. It's just, again, we just let things roll. We don't stop, and we're not intentional about this. So attending to our feelings and thoughts rather than just reacting and letting things roll, well, that helps us with the process of separating what is in our control from what is not. Many of us are stuck. We're in denial because it's not what we want or what we want to deal with. So we fight up against something that is. I've got many examples of this. So my daughter's a college student, and her university is not letting her move into her room early. The room is empty. She knows the prior tenant had moved out. She's offered to clean it herself. The system just will not allow for her to move in early. She has written, I don't know how many letters. She's been very assertive about it. She's tried to go up against it. And now I've told her she's fighting gravity. She can continue to write letters and memos and emails, or she can accept that this is the policy. It is set, and she can instead put her energy onto coming up with a plan for her, whatever her housing needs to be in between. So in looking at this idea of control versus acceptance, step back and look. Is this a situation where I can make an impact? If I can, I will try my best. If it is something that is totally outside of my control, I choose acceptance, and I will not beat my head up against something that I cannot change. But I'm never out of control. I choose my responses, even when faced with something that I didn't wish for or choose. Which brings us back to these questions. How can I take this situation to get the best outcome? Am I operating in a way that is consistent with my values? If this is our starting point, our perspective, then we're okay no matter the circumstance. And I use the example, even a really tough health diagnosis. It's hard. We don't want to spend all of our energy stuck on, this wasn't supposed to be. This isn't what I planned for. This wasn't what was supposed to happen to me. Instead, we have to come to a place, and it doesn't have to be immediate, but we want to get to a place where we accept what is. And then look at, where can I have an impact? If there is an area that can be impacted, we need to be brave and do it. I wouldn't have the right to vote if someone didn't do the tough stuff and try to create change. But there are some things, again, like gravity, that are. So the key is to go through this process of intentionally looking at what needs to be accepted and what can be impacted or what can be changed. Acceptance or surrendering means letting go of unproductive efforts to control the uncontrollable. It involves accepting that there is nothing one can do to change a certain situation. Surrendering is not the same as being a victim and passively being overtaken without a choice and being a carpet. Surrendering means you make the decision to let go of things that you cannot control and focus on the things that you can. All right, we are all having struggles during these challenging times. There are circumstances where professional support is called for. It doesn't mean we're not adequate. It doesn't mean we're not doing something right. It just means we are being human. So this virus outbreak is not what we wish for. It is not what we ask for, but it's what we've got. What can we impact? What self-care plans can we put into place to make sure we're at our optimal window of tolerance? I hope this gives you some additional ideas that you can put into practice. And if you need some extra help with your planning, we want you to please feel free to contact us here at KEAP. That's our whole reason for being. So I thank you so much for your time today. You can get more information about employee assistance at our website. You can always contact us. You can reach me specifically at trina.kuntz@ky.gov. Again, thank you for your time today.